how the dark web was created accidentally. Let's take a look.
In a remote cabin in Texas, Ross Ulbricht sits in front of a used laptop that he bought in cash. On the table next to him is a 10-gram bag of hallucinogenic mushrooms that he grew himself in a basement. He hits enter.
That's
At
dirty.
that moment, the first item was listed on a site called the Silk Road. Without realizing it, Ross didn't just create an illegal website, he accidentally created the modern dark web as we know it.
The dark web is a subsection of the internet known for nefarious activities.
Kind of loud. Hold on.
As we call it, the internet's evil twin.
LSD, cocaine, and ecstasy are now just a click of a mouse away.
I am just amazed that a website like this can stay up for so long.
The Justice Department will find you and hold you accountable for your crimes.
Ross Ulbricht.
Ross Ulbricht.
I want to have had a substantial positive impact on the future of humanity by that time.
Bro did not know what he was gonna cook. Bro
Ross
cooked.
wasn't a career criminal, and he wasn't even a big drug user. He was a libertarian who dreamed of a free market system where people could buy and sell things free from the government's intervention. To build this free marketplace, the
AKA
government couldn't
tax
track.
avoidance.
He combined three already existing technologies. Those were Tor, Bitcoin, and the good old US postal system. These are the three tools for how drugs are bought and sold on the dark web today.
At the time, I thought, if Bitcoin makes payments anonymous and private, then what are we waiting for? Why are we sitting around talking about it? Let's put it into action.
Now, most people are probably familiar with Bitcoin and the postal system, but Tor was Ross's real weapon. Ironically, Tor was created by the US Navy in the 1990s to hide the military's digital footprint. The US government made the software behind Tor public though, because more users on Tor's network meant that the US government would be harder to spy on. Ross used Tor to make the Silk Road impossible to track. There was no way for investigators to track who was buying or selling on the site. In that Texas cabin, Ross knew that if a single piece of data was traced back to his IP address, his experiment would end in a prison cell before it even began. Ross didn't know it at the time, but by setting up his marketplace on the Tor network, he had just switched the lights on to the dark web. But getting people to access his marketplace was gonna be a challenge. Accessing the dark web wasn't popular back in 2011, so Ross was gonna need some serious marketing to sell his bag of mushrooms. Ross then
He was
created an
adamant
online
to sell his
persona
mushrooms.
named Altoid. Ross began posting under the name Altoid on popular forums like shroomery.org, which was fittingly for mushroom users, and bitcointalk.org, which was still very small back in 2011. Instead of saying, "I built this site," he disguised himself as a curious user of the Silk Road who had discovered the marketplace. His posts usually followed a similar format. "I came across this website called Silk Road. It's a Tor hidden service that claims to allow you to buy and sell things online anonymously. I'm thinking of buying off it, but wanted to see if anyone here had heard of it and could recommend it." He knew that the biggest barrier to his site was that most people didn't know how to use Tor. To overcome this, in his posts, he would include the link silkroad420.wordpress.com. This link didn't take you to the Silk Road, but it brought you to a detailed how-to guide that explained how to download Tor and how to access his marketplace. Ross was recruiting people onto the dark web.
So it was the first time that we saw this birth on the internet of mixing cryptocurrency and an IP blocking software. So, you know, in cybercrime, you go after one, the IP address and trace it through the network, or two, you go after the cache. And this one kind of blocked both.
I mean,
Once
but they
these
can trace
curious mushroom
Bitcoin now,
buyers
though.
entered the dark web, they then had to find Ross's specific marketplace. Every site on the dark web uses a URL that ends in .onion. While .com tells your browser to look on the public internet, .onion tells the Tor browser to stay inside a specialized encrypted network that hides your identity. Ross's how-to guide gave the users the exact URL to type in. Finally, Ross got his first couple users to access the Silk Road on the dark web. The only inventory on his site was some mushrooms that he was growing from his basement. But Ross strategically listed these mushrooms for a very low price to attract his first few buyers. Listing his own product allowed him to play the role of the vendor, ironing out the kinks of his illegal storefront in real time. Ross eventually got one of his users to bite and selected to purchase the mushrooms. Ross was ecstatic. He wrote in his journal that day, "My first order, I'll never forget it. I was so excited, I didn't know what to do with myself." But Ross needed to stay focused because now was time to test out his payment system. This is where the second technology, Bitcoin, was key.
Do you know what this is? It's a digital currency. It's really trying to become the currency of the internet.
And they pay for items using an online currency called Bitcoins.
There's no ability to trace money. There's no ability to trace who you're talking to, really. It could be anywhere in the world.
Basically, there's this limited number of Bitcoins, and they're this virtual currency.
Unlike Amazon, you couldn't just swipe a credit card on the Silk Road. You had to buy Bitcoin and then deposit it into your Silk Road balance. Because you don't need any name, ID, or social security number to own Bitcoin, these transactions on the Silk Road could remain completely private. But in a marketplace,
But it gets
full of
tracked though.
criminals, how do you
Bitcoins
gain
get tracked
trust?
nowadays. I don't know how they do it,
Ross
but
solved
they do it.
this by building an escrow system on the Silk Road. When a buyer pressed purchase, the Bitcoin wasn't immediately sent to the vendor. It was held in a central account controlled by Ross. The funds were only released to the vendor after the buyer confirmed that the drugs had actually arrived in the mail. If the package never showed up, then Ross stepped in as the judge. But Ross knew that even with this escrow system, a smart federal agent could still trace the path of a specific Bitcoin to the public blockchain. To make the money truly untraceable, he built a final layer of security, a tumbler system. How this tumbler system works is when a payment is released to the vendor, the tumbler would break that payment into dozens of much smaller payments. So essentially, instead of a vendor being sent one whole Bitcoin for a sale, they would first be sent 0.13 Bitcoin, then immediately after 0.22 Bitcoin, then 0.17 Bitcoin, then 0.03 Bitcoin, and etc., all the way up until the small payments equal one full Bitcoin. By the time the Bitcoin reached the vendor's balance, it was a mix of hundreds of people's different coins, and it was virtually impossible to track. Ross believed that he built the perfect marketplace free from government control, and now is time to test out his first sale. The buyer of the first bag of mushrooms had sent the Bitcoin to the Silk Road's escrow, and now Ross had to test out his third key technology of the process, the US postal system.
So I think he does get caught. Because of the Bitcoin, if I remember correctly, but I don't think Bitcoin is like clean.
For his first bag of mushrooms, he focused on the biggest giveaway in the mail, the scent. To hide this, Ross used a basic kitchen vacuum sealer. He placed the magic mushrooms into a plastic bag and sucked out all the air. This not only compressed the product to make it look flat, but it also trapped the odor molecules inside. To be extra safe, he wiped down the outside of the bag with alcohol wipes. This removed any stray mushroom spores that could be detected by a drug dog. He placed the flat, sealed bag into a standard white business envelope intended to look like a boring piece of junk mail. He printed out a label for where the envelope should be sent to and used a fake return address so that the package couldn't be traced back to him. Ross then drove from his remote cabin in Texas to the nearest post office. Instead of going inside and talking to a clerk, he simply dropped the envelope into a collection bin outside. A few days later, the buyer, who had discovered the Silk Road through Altoids forum posts, confirmed that he had received the package. The mushrooms were intact, the vacuum seal it held, and the mailman delivered the bag of mushrooms right to the buyer's door without any issues. This single delivery was the proof of concept that Ross had been looking for. This transaction proved that if you combined Tor to hide the IP address, Bitcoin to hide the money, and vacuum sealing to hide the scent, you could move drugs across the country with almost zero risk of getting caught. Ross knew he had the blueprint to grow the Silk Road beyond just
Okay, so this guy is way better than me at telling a story or like narrating, because you can tell he's putting like a character. I'm not that guy to put a character. I'm just me, bro. I don't know. I can't do this. I can maybe, but I just choose not to. I don't know. This guy is just nice though. He's nice at what he does.
basement mushrooms. The next couple months, I sold about 10 pounds of shrooms through my
Damn.
site. Some orders were as small as a gram, and others were in the QP range. Before long, I completely sold out. Looking back on it, I maybe should have raised my prices more and stretched it out, but at least now I was all digital, no physical risk anymore. Before long, traffic started to build. People were taking notice. Smart, interested people. In the early months of the Silk Road, Ross was learning how to run this site on the fly. He was teaching himself the programming language PHP as he went. And because the Silk Road was built,
was he
with
making
basic
money though?
code, the site crashed.
Like, was he getting a commission per transaction that is not, you know, like him selling, like how Amazon does it, like referral fee? Does he get a referral?
Constantly. Even with minimal users, he spent the early days constantly fixing bugs in the code and fighting off small-scale hackers who had already discovered the site. Ross wrote in his journal at the time, "At some point, a hacker saw some major flaws in my code. I sent it to him to review, and he came back with basically, 'This is amateur.' I knew it too. I tried to work with him, but I think he lost interest, and since I wasn't charging commission, I only had my shroom money to pay him with." Up until this point, Ross was running the entire site himself. From processing transactions, messaging buyers, and updating the code, he was working extremely long hours. But what came next proved that this wasn't a one-man job. On June 1st, 2011, at 4:20 p.m., perhaps a coincidence, or maybe just an editor with a sense of humor, the website Gawker published an article on the Silk Road. They explained the Silk Road as the Amazon.com of illegal drugs. The article also explains how the purchases are made with bitcoins, and that one bitcoin is worth about $8.67.
That's crazy.
Though the exchange rate
now it's worth like
wildly
$80,000
every day. Side note, $8.67 per bitcoin is 9,300 times less than what Bitcoin is valued at today. This article from Gawker exploded Silk Road in popularity.
Gawker did a huge story about it, and after that, Senator Chuck Schumer, said that it's the most blatant, drug marketplace in the world, and it needs to be shut down.
What you can buy on this hidden internet is shocking.
You could buy drugs, you could buy guns.
The Silk Road website is a particular headache for authorities. It's an anonymous online marketplace where people sell drugs that are posted to customers all over the world.
Nah,
The site
they
grew
just
with thousands
ruined
of
it
users,
themselves
and
by
Ross was
talking
becoming
about it.
overwhelmed. Ross now had too many vendors looking to join, many of whom were low-quality scammers. To fix this, Ross built a rating system where vendors were given karma points. This acted like positive or negative reviews, just like you'd see on Amazon. Buyers then only purchased from legit vendors on the site with many karma points, and the scammers were filtered out. The marketplace went from having an inventory of 10 grams of mushrooms to now having a cornucopia of drugs for sale. The Silk Road featured Afghan hash, Sour 13 weed, LSD, ecstasy, cocaine, and black tar heroin, all available for purchase at the click of a button. Right around this time, Ross wrote in his journal, 2 US senators came out against the site and against Bitcoin. I started to get in a bad state of mind. I was mentally taxed, and now I felt extremely vulnerable and scared. The US government, my main enemy, was aware of me, and some of its members were calling for my destruction. For a girl named Julia, Ross's long-term girlfriend, things had gone too far. Julia was the only one who knew Ross was behind the Silk Road, and she began having panic attacks on a regular basis. She peered at men in the grocery store and wondered if they were undercover cops who knew that she lived with the man who started Silk Road. Julia wanted him to give it up, but Ross chose to double down. One evening in 2011, Ross came home to the cabin in rural Texas and had something exciting to show Julia. He opened his laptop, pressed a few buttons, and spun around the computer for Julia to see. Ross said, "Look, those are guns that just got listed on the site." Julia panicked and pleaded with Ross that things were going way too far. Julia felt that Ross valued Silk Road more than her, so she left Ross before the year ended. Ross was not only devastated, but he was also fearful that Julia could tell others about his involvement. Ross decided he needed to escape Texas, too. Shortly after their breakup, Ross packed up his bags, sold his truck, and he moved to Australia. In Sydney, life got much better, and Ross's anxiety of getting caught was much lower. Real money was now flowing in, and Ross was taking commission on every sale. For the smaller purchases, Ross would take 10 to 15%, and for the larger bulk orders, his commission would drop to 8%. From this commission, Ross was making between $100,000 to $200,000 a month. The inventory of guns was growing, where buyers could now purchase Uzis, Beretta handguns,
That's
and AR-15
crazy.
assault rifles that could all show up right at your doorstep. In addition to guns and ammo, Silk Road also featured hacking tools and forged passports. All of this brought more press around Silk Road, and the media began taunting the government for not being able to shut it down.
I mean, I think it started off as sharing this idea, but then he really did turn to, like, I am the captain of this ship, and that's what goes, and he was making a
I'm the
lot of
captain
money.
now.
Ross interacted with dozens of people on the site each day. He was communicating directly with vendors, customers, and a couple of part-time employees that he found online to help with the site's programming problems. His first hire was a man whose online name was Chronic Pain, later identified as Curtis Green. Curtis was hired to be a moderator and resolve disputes between buyers and vendors. Curtis didn't know Ross's real identity either. They just went by their dark web usernames. Ross would send Curtis roughly $1,000 worth of Bitcoin each week as payment. This Bitcoin would now be worth millions. But arguably much more important than Curtis, Ross found a man who could potentially help him with high-level programming. This high-level coder went by the internet name Variety Jones, or VJ is what people on the dark web would call him. He seemed extremely intelligent to Ross, based on how he was answering Ross's coding questions. Speaking about Variety, Ross wrote in his journal, "This was the biggest and strongest-willed character I had met on the site thus far. He quickly proved to me that he had value by pointing out a major security hole in the site I was unaware of. He also helped me get my head on straight regarding legal protection, cover stories, devising a will, finding a successor, and so on. He's been a real mentor." They went from speaking every few days to every few hours and eventually to every few minutes. But one day, Variety messaged Ross with a bizarre question. "Have you ever seen the movie Princess Bride?" It was a dark comedy from 1987 about a pirate that inherits the name Dread Pirate Roberts from somebody else. Over the years, a new person would take on the name Dread Pirate Roberts, and the old person would retire. So at any given time, no one really knew who Dread Pirate Roberts was. Variety told Ross, "You need to change your name from admin to Dread Pirate Roberts." It was a genius idea by Variety. If Ross was ever caught, he could theoretically admit that he was Dread Pirate Roberts at one point in time, but he wasn't the person who started Silk Road. And if they asked who Dread Pirate Roberts was before him, Ross could plead ignorance and say that all he knows is that the person called themselves Dread Pirate Roberts. These ideas Variety had for improving the security of Silk Road
Bro.
made Ross trust him
Bro's a
more
genius.
and more. It was now 2013. Ross was over 2 years into building Silk Road, and he believed he was invincible. But one day, an email popped up into the inbox of
Bro, I thought I
Dread
got an
Pirate
email.
Roberts with an obscure offer. The message came from a user whose username was Knob. Knob messaged, "Mr. Silk Road, I am a great admirer of your work. Brilliant, utterly brilliant. I will keep this short and to the point. I want to buy this site. I've been in the business for over 20 years. Silk Road is the future of trafficking." Ross then replied, "The site's starting price was at 9 figures," and added, "This is more than a business to me. It's a revolution, and it's becoming my life's work. It would not be easy to pass the baton without hurting the enterprise. And right now, that is more important to me than the money." The drug enforcement agent, posing as Knob, sat at his desk reading this message from Dread Pirate Roberts and almost choked. Until now, the DEA had no idea that the Silk Road was an operation this large. Knob turned down the offer, but now DPR believed that Knob was a major player in the industry and had his respect. By earning Ross's respect, the DEA now had a different idea in mind. Knob messaged DPR saying that instead, he had a kilogram of cocaine that he was looking to sell. Knob wanted to see if DPR could find him a buyer. Just a day later, DPR responded, "Hey, I think we have a buyer for you." In no time at all, DPR connected Knob with a middleman who worked for the Silk Road and agreed to purchase the cocaine before sending it to another buyer. The middleman was Curtis Green, Ross's first employee. Curtis, in bad judgment, sent an encrypted message containing his home address to Knob for where the cocaine should be sent to. Now the DEA was en route to Spanish Fork, Utah.
Bro.
Just after 11 a.m. on January 17th, 2013, a fake post office worker arrived at Green's home to drop off the package. He set the package down and yelled into the screen door,
"Anybody home?"
Green looked directly at the white postal van and then down at the package and walked cautiously towards the front door to grab the package. It was go time.
His laptop was
Dozens
open.
of men from the local SWAT team and the DEA rushed out of vehicles, guns drawn, and trampled across the lawn. A black battering ram then slammed through the front door.
"On the floor!"
they yelled. Green was petrified and told the cops that he'd do whatever they needed. He gave the agents his usernames and passwords to Silk Road and explained exactly what he did for the site. The problem was, even Curtis Green had no idea who Dread Pirate Roberts was. He only knew Dread Pirate Roberts as his Silk Road username. This was a step in the right direction, successfully eliminating one of Silk Road's employees. But through this arrest, they got no closer to finding out its true leader. But later that night, the story took
Bro's
an
such a good
insane
storyteller.
twist. One of the agents that was there arresting Curtis Green earlier in the day used Green's username and password to log into his Silk Road account, posing as Curtis. This DEA's officer's name was Sean Bridges, and he was an expert in computer forensics. He knew exactly how to operate this site's back end without being detected by his fellow DEA agents. Once he had control of Green's administrator account, he emptied the balances of many top vendors on Silk Road, stealing the Bitcoin from them. He moved around 20,000 Bitcoin into a personal wallet of his own. This would be worth $1.7 billion today. Because the money was being moved by Green's account, Ross was 100% convinced that Green was robbing the marketplace. Ross didn't know that Green was in federal custody and fully believed that Green was sabotaging everything that Ross had built. Ross then in a panic messaged Knob since Knob had Green's real address. Ross said, "This will be the first time I have had a call in my muscle," and asked that Green be beat up, then forced to send his Bitcoins back. Knob then later responded, "Do you want him beat up, shot, just pay to visit?" Ross replied, "I'd like him beat up, then forced to send his Bitcoins he stole back. Like sit him down at his computer and make him do it." The DEA agents were gonna go along with this for as long as they could to try and get more information out of who Dread Pirate Roberts truly was. The DEA agents then took Green to the Salt Lake Marriott in downtown. To make it look like Green had been interrogated, they waterboarded him and ruffled him up to make him look terrified and exhausted. They then took photos of Green shaken up like this and sent them to Ross. Ross felt that Green knew too much though, and he changed his mind. Ross wanted Green killed. Ross then messaged Knob, "Can you change the order to execute rather than torture?" DPR wrote that the employee was on the inside for a while, and now that he's been arrested, I'm afraid he'll give up info. He finished off the message by saying he's never killed a man or had one killed before, but it is the right move in this case. The DEA couldn't believe what they were seeing, but they wanted to keep going along with it. They wanted to gain even more trust from Ross. To simulate the aftermath of a murder, they didn't even use professional makeup. They had Green lay down on the floor of his bathroom, and they splattered Campbell's chunky soup across Green's face to mimic the appearance of blood and vomit. They drenched him in water to make his skin look pale and waxy, like he had been laying there dead for a few hours. The undercover agent, acting as Knob, then took a picture of Green laying on the floor looking like he was dead and sent it back to Ross. Ross then transferred $40,000 worth of Bitcoin to Knob as a payment for the hit.
He did also tell this undercover agent, "I'm pissed I had to kill him, but what's done is done, and that I just can't believe he was so stupid. I just wish more people had some integrity."
And he's like, "Well, I can't believe that guy I just murdered didn't have integrity."
The agents were shocked that this staged hit actually worked. Ross's peaceful experiment for a marketplace that was free from government intervention had now led him to what he believed was an intentional murder of one of his best friends. And this wouldn't be the last hit that Ross allegedly ordered to be carried out. In March 2013, Ross was being blackmailed by a user called Friendly Chemist. Friendly Chemist claimed to be a supplier for one of Silk Road's biggest vendors, Lucy Drop. Friendly Chemist claimed that Lucy Drop owed them $900,000. Friendly Chemist threatened Ross by saying, "You leave me no choice. I want 500,000 USD within 72 hours, or I'm going to post all the info I have. I hate to do this, but I need the money or I'm going to release it all." Over 5,000 user details and about 24 vendor identities. To Ross, this was one of his biggest nightmares. Silk Road's whole foundation was built on the idea of remaining anonymous. Instead of paying the blackmail, Ross went to Lucy Drop and essentially asked them, "Who is this guy, and do you actually owe them the money?" Lucy Drop then responded by saying, "Friendly Chemist is a scamming piece of work and a total liability." Ross was worried that Friendly Chemist could leak everything, and he knew he needed to do something. Lucy Drop eventually puts Ross in contact with another user that should be able to handle the situation. The user goes by Red White. After some introductions to meeting Red White, Ross messaged Red White by saying, "Hi again, RNW. I hate to come to you with a problem when we are just getting to know one another, but Blake, Friendly Chemist, is causing me problems. I would like to put a bounty on his head if it's not too much trouble for you. What would be an adequate amount to motivate you to find him? Necessities like this do happen from time to time for a person in my position. I have others I can turn to, but it is always good to have options, and you are close to the case right now. Hopefully this is something you are open to and can be another aspect of our business relationship." Ross and Red White then go back and forth some, explaining how the hit should be carried out. Red White explains, "If you want it to look like an accident, it would cost a lot more. It wouldn't be suspicious. He would just leave home one day and not return. If you don't care what it looks like, it would be cheaper than the accident." Red White initially wants up to $300,000 to carry out the hit, but Ross says that not long ago, he had a clean hit done for $80K. Eventually, they settle on $150,000 in Bitcoin for Red White to carry out the hit on Friendly Chemist. Later that night, Red White messages Ross, "Your problem has been taken care of." They seized a bunch of the stuff that he had with him at the time as well. Rest easy though, because he won't be blackmailing anyone again. Ever. But little did Ross know, he was getting scammed this entire time. Red White, Friendly Chemist, and Lucy Drop were all one person. James Ellingson of Canada had created internet personas, and he just scammed Ross into sending him $150,000 to carry out a hit on a person that never existed. Red White sent a fake photo to Ross of a man sprawled out on the ground, intending to look like Friendly Chemist. The victim had tape over his mouth, appeared to be wearing a white shirt, and looked like he had just been taken out. In response to this picture, Ross said, "I have no need for any of his possessions, so you can do whatever you want with that stuff. Thank you again for your assistance. DPR." James Ellingson, the man behind these 3 different personas, couldn't believe his scam had just worked. He saw the money that Ross was willing to give away to protect Silk Road, and he believed he had another plan to get even more money out of Ross. Just a day later, Red White responded with news that Friendly Chemist had 4 roommates who were all in on the blackmail plot and had copies of other stolen user data and even stolen Bitcoin. Now Ross was met with the difficult decision as to what to do with all 4 of these people. Of course, this was all fake.
Oh my God, so bad to see.
To pull even more money out of Ross. Ross originally wanted to round up all 4 of them.
How do you figure that? Like, how do you, like, DPR? How does he like avoid that? You know, it's like
separate them.
Oh my God,
get
it's
them
crazy.
to out each other and give up their stolen money. Red White responds back with some logistical issues, saying it would be possible, but they would have to get them all at once so that one does not get away. In response, Ross proposes, "Okay, let's just hit Andrew and leave it at that." Red White wanted to get even more money out of Ross though, and offered a package deal of $500,000 in Bitcoin to take out all 4. Red White even said that anything recovered would be split 50-50 with you. Ross then responded, "Okay, I'll defer to your better judgment and hope we can recover some assets from them." $500,000 in Bitcoin has been sent. Ross now believed he had ordered 6 different hits. What he didn't know was that none of them were real.
But if you go online and you're like, hello everybody, I'd like to hire a hitman, you're gonna get the feds.
You'd think that he's smart enough to know that you shouldn't look for a hitman online. You're probably talking to a federal agent. But apparently he had no idea.
No bodies were found, but again, he ordered them, he paid for them, and then he bragged about them afterwards.
While Ross was sending hundreds of thousands in Bitcoin to imaginary hitmen, the FBI was hard at work, tracking down the man behind Dread Pirate Roberts. One of the federal agents behind the investigation was a man named Gary Alford. Gary was a records guy who believed that every criminal, no matter how genius, makes mistakes at the very beginning when they think no one is watching. With this logic, Gary used Google's advanced search feature to find the first time Silk Road was mentioned on the internet. He first found a post on a forum called bitcointalk.org from a user named Altoid. Gary noticed the date of this post, January 27th, 2011, the same month Silk Road launched. Gary kept digging into Altoid and found another post from a different forum called shroomery.org. Again, it was Altoid promoting the site. But the big mistake that Gary was looking for came from a post that Altoid made on Bitcoin Talk in October of 2011. In this thread, Altoid was looking for the best and brightest IT pro in the Bitcoin community to be the lead developer in a venture-backed Bitcoin startup company. If interested, please send your answers to the following questions at rossolbricht@gmail.com. The panic must have set in almost immediately after Ross pressed post. Within a minute, Ross edited the post to have people email him at frosty@frosty.com rather than his personal email. Frosty@frosty.com was a fake email that Ross had made months ago to hide his real identity, but the damage was already done. Like many large websites, the forum Bitcoin Talk keeps a revision history of every post. While the public only saw the Frosty email linked, investigators could look back to the original version of the post and saw rossolbricht@gmail.com. When Gary did some digging into Ross Ulbricht, he found a smiling, clean-cut young man with a master's degree in engineering from Penn State. Could this really be the guy behind the largest drug trade in the world? But it was the summary section that led Gary to believe he found the guy. Ross wrote that he is creating an economic simulation to give people a first-hand experience of what it would be like to live in a world without the systemic use of force. To a casual viewer, this just looked like a college kid nerding out over libertarian politics. But to Gary Alford, who had spent months researching Dread Pirate Roberts,
it was him.
Language was almost identical. Dread Pirate Roberts also preached on the Silk Road about a free market outside reach of the government. It was now July 2013, and Ross was living in San Francisco. He was renting an apartment with 3 other roommates for $1,000 a month that he paid in cash. Ross also went by the name Josh Terry to everyone in San Francisco, and he had fake IDs to prove it. The Josh Terry persona wasn't enough though, and Ross wanted more identities that he could disguise himself under. Ross then went on the Silk Road and purchased 9 different fake IDs from a vendor in Canada. Each ID had a different name and address, but they all featured his own face. Ross thought he was being smart for giving himself backup identities, but he made a massive mistake by having them all shipped directly to the San Francisco apartment that he was living in. In July 2013, a package from Canada was flagged during a routine mail search at the border. An officer simply opened a suspicious envelope and found 9 fake driver's licenses, all with different names but the same face. A few Homeland Security officers then showed up at Ross's apartment to speak with him. At the time, they had no idea this was the guy behind the Silk Road. Ross was calm when speaking with the officers and even showed them his real Texas ID under the name Ross Ulbricht. He tried to talk his way out of it by explaining that hypothetically, anyone could send anything to anybody's house via the Silk Road. The agents didn't have enough evidence to arrest Ross, but they did something much worse. They filed a formal report. When the report on Ross Ulbricht hit the federal database, the situation escalated rapidly. Ross Ulbricht was the exact same name that Agent Gary Alford had just found in the Altoid archives. The evidence was now clear. The feds had a face, a name, and a confirmed location in San Francisco, but they had one massive problem: encryption. If the feds kicked down his door, Ross would most likely have enough time to hit a single button or even close the lid to his laptop, and all the evidence would be behind a password. All the evidence of the hits, the Bitcoin transactions, and the chat logs would be lost forever. The feds didn't need to just arrest Ross, but they needed to catch him in the act in order to convict him. On October 1st, 2023, a team of undercover agents began tailing Ross as he left his apartment. He walked into a nearby cafe, but there were no open seats. Ross then wandered into the Glen Park Public Library. Ross headed up to the science fiction section on the second floor, sat down at a table, and opened his laptop. He had no idea that the random people around him weren't there to browse books. They were actually undercover elite federal agents. At 3:14 p.m., the signal came through. Ross was logged into Silk Road's master control panel, but the feds couldn't just rush him right away. They needed a distraction so that he would look away from his screen. Suddenly, two undercover agents, a man and a woman, stood up behind Ross and began screaming at each other in an argument. The woman yelled, the man shouted back, and for a split second, the entire library went silent. Just as the agents intended, Ross turned around to see what all the commotion was. In a split second, an undercover agent sitting across the table from Ross lunged forward and snatched the open laptop off the table. Before Ross could even process what was happening, he was tackled to the ground by another agent. The agent who grabbed the laptop quickly handed it over to the lead investigator, who quickly began clicking through the open windows to ensure that the computer's session didn't time out. There it was, glowing on the screen, the administrator's dashboard for Silk Road, logged in as Dread Pirate Roberts. As Ross lay on the ground of the library floor, pinned by several agents, he didn't try to fight back. He reportedly asked the agents who they were and why they were doing this, trying to maintain his persona of an innocent person. Ross was put into handcuffs and led out of the library to a secure prison. Once the laptop was taken back to the FBI's lab, they found the most incriminating evidence of all. It was a folder on Ross's laptop titled Log. Ross had kept a daily journal of his activities since 2011. He had documented his growth, his fears, his conversations with Variety Jones, and most importantly, his payments for the hits. The log was basically a digital confession that spanned the entire history of the Silk Road. The trial of Ross Ulbricht then began in January of 2015, and it didn't take long for the government's mountain of evidence to crush his defense team. At his sentencing in May of 2015, the courtroom was packed with families of people who had died from drug overdoses linked to the Silk Road. Despite having no prior criminal record, Ross was sentenced to 2 life in prison terms plus 40 years without the possibility of parole. Interestingly though, Ross was never actually charged or convicted for the murder-for-hire plots in his trial, largely because they were scams and nobody actually died. However, with 2 life sentences and no possibility for parole, it was clear Ross would spend the rest of his life behind bars. Or, well, not so fast.
And if you vote for me on day 1, I will commute the sentence of Ross Ulbricht.
What?
And so that's why you libertarians, instead of going and voting third party and being purists about it and not doing anything because you know your candidate's not going to win, why don't you vote for a winner, me, Trump?
If I find that Ross Ulbricht was punished as an example, then I will give him clemency. Okay.
The guy has been
the government is so powerful.
For
what the hell?
A website.
He envisions Silk Road as an avenue for peace, and only the president can help him make a U-turn on the road to redemption. Free Ross Ulbricht, Mr. President.
Last night, Donald Trump granted me a full pardon. I was doing life without parole, and I was locked up for more than 11 years. But he let me out. I'm a free man now.
What?
In the early morning hours of January 22nd, 2025, Ross Ulbricht was allowed to walk free. Donald Trump stuck true to his promise, and just a day after his inauguration, Ross Ulbricht was given a full and unconditional presidential pardon.
So I'm not in a prison cell anymore.
Keep in mind that no one alleged that Ulbricht personally traded or sold illegal narcotics or profited from any sort of criminal activity. He was just the guy who created the platform where such transactions could take place.
Say on Craigslist, there's illicit stuff going on. But this wasn't just the government shutting down Craigslist. This was the government arresting Craig and giving him 2 life sentences plus 40 years when he had not committed a violent crime at all.
Is the CEO of Verizon responsible if you talk to your drug dealer on the phone?
Mark Zuckerberg is not going to go to jail, nor should he if somebody uses WhatsApp to traffic drugs, which of course it's probably happening, right? Or if
That's true. But here's the thing with the Silk Road. It's not regulated, and there's no intent to regulate. Whereas WhatsApp, there's an intent to regulate. And there's but is there a law for that? I don't think there
somebody
is.
uses Instagram or Facebook to illegally smuggle guns.
Because there does seem to be this perception out there that, oh, he just ran a website, you know, and how can he be held responsible for what happened on this website? But I guess you're arguing it was a little bit more than that, and that he was he had knowingly constructed an illicit marketplace and was profiting from it to the tune of millions of dollars.
Well, I don't have to argue that. He was found guilty of that.
Ultimately, libertarians across the world fought to convince the highest levels of government that Ross should be a free man. And to now, Ross is navigating in a free world that looks far different from when he first walked into that Texas cabin to launch his experiment. Only time will tell what Dread Pirate Roberts chooses to do with this hard-won freedom. Do you think it was the right move
he's
to
got
set
some money.
Ross free?
He's definitely got
This
some
wasn't
Bitcoin
the first
somewhere.
time powerful people turned human beings into tools to serve an idea. Decades earlier, Kim Jong-il kidnapped South Korea's greatest filmmaker and actress and forced them to build North Korea's film
video.
industry. That video
This guy's
is
so good at storytelling, it's ridiculous. Moral of the story, never journal. Yeah, he journaled everything. That was the quickest 40 minutes. Yeah, it did not feel like 40 minutes. No, I imagine the person that eats shrooms worth of 1 to 2 Bitcoins is crazy. Yeah, I don't think that was an accident. Damn. W video.